Hello, welcome to the Efficio Spotlight on Procurement podcast. My name is Simon Lipscomb, and thank you very much for listening. And more importantly, happy 2025. Happy New Year, everybody. We've come to that time again. For those who are regular listeners, you'll remember this time last year, we recorded a podcast with a number of my colleagues from within Efficio, who are all experts in particular parts of the world or particular topics. And we asked them for their predictions of 2024. We thought it would be a great idea to do the same for 2025. So I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague Ed, who's a specialist in sustainability within our business, Isabel, who works within our Middle East region, Imad, who is going to give you his perspective on the US market, Dan, who's going to talk about public sector, Mark, who is going to talk to us about the utility space, and then finally my colleague Mert, who is focused on private equity. So without any further ado, Ed, what are your predictions for 2025 on sustainability?
Thanks, Simon. So I think from a sustainability perspective, particularly a sustainable procurement perspective, I think we're going to see more of what we've seen this year. So from our perspective, organizations, businesses have started to move from much more from talking about and planning around sustainability to actually actioning those plans. And the way we see that is, is companies actually investing their money in building clear carbon baselines, building tooling to measure that, building their team capabilities in particular to be able to meet the various legislations that are in place now or coming into place shortly. I think some of the things that we do know for 2025, some of the big areas around regulations and tracking will be SBTi's update to their corporate net zero standards. I think this has been long anticipated, but it's really going to double down on the science and how organizations really need to take account for their supply chains and the climate goals and how they're going to achieve that. That's going to then start to take a step forward as well with transition plans. So again, some organizations have really been front runners there this year, but we suspect more are going to follow in those footsteps next year and really start to demonstrate to the market credible plans around management of the environment and greenhouse gas emissions, etc. I think last year we talked about CSRD. I think next year we'll be talking more about CSDDD, so the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. Again, that's in terms of procurement perspective, that's really going to double down on that supply chain due diligence and how organizations are really going to start to take accountability for their supply chains and what happens within them. In terms of the things we don't know, I think it's going to be an interesting year. Clearly, there's a lot of change in the political world, geopolitics, economics, ongoing disruption in terms of various conflicts. So how they play out on organizations, which may mean they focus in areas that are not around sustainability, more kind of doubling down on cost management and other aspects of resilience. I think we need to wait and see there. But from our perspective, we remain hopeful that the momentum built around taking action on sustainability in a meaningful way, in a measurable way, will look to continue in 2025. And I suspect we'll start to see probably, unfortunately, factors, particularly around the environment, weather patterns, etc., really starting to double down the message that things are changing and we don't have a long period of time to start to improve the way that we interact as businesses and organizations on a social basis, on an environmental basis. And that, as ever, will be hugely important within procurement, supply chain and supply chain management.
Thanks, Ed. And Isabel, what do you think 2025 holds for the Middle East region?
Hello, just to give an update into how the 24 has been based into the predictions that we had last year. So I think most of the predictions have been come to life in terms of obviously the construction activity, supply chain, some of the key materials shortage, and looking at different ways to diversify supply chains. In general, the GDP, the economic activity, got a little bit more balanced, but the outlook for 25 is actually that the economy will continue growing. Obviously, some of the giga projects will continue. New projects have started as well. Obviously, in the different phases, some of the big ones have started already with the design phase. As you might know as well, there was the Riyadh Metro opened last week and is fully operational next year, the 1st of January as well. So that is going to declutter a bit the problems with the infrastructure in Riyadh and the mobility of the workforce as well. In terms of the key themes, what we are seeing is the same progression that we saw last year in terms of obviously the push to diversify the economy, as well the requirements in terms of localizing foreign companies to have their local regional headquarters. That has been already in place in 24, and companies that are slowly abiding by that. That keeps as well in terms of procurement activity, moving towards more diversified supply chains, dividing some of the key raw materials. The maturity of the supply chains, as we said, they are looking into more diversifying, bringing some more strategic alliances, bringing some more foreign investors into the economy, and obviously focusing into increasing the manufacturing sector as well. That is going to give an opportunity as well to procurement organizations in developing strong relationships with their key vendors. Obviously, as well, in terms of increasing the maturity of the workforce, we are looking into more value for money, securing the key access to raw materials as well. And also as well in some of the key skill sector with digitization, AI, that is a big push for the Vision 2030 to create digital hubs as well and supply chain hubs as well. So we have new projects as well starting that they have started developing with the King Salman Airport that is looking at finding partners to help deliver those projects, and obviously to try to diversify as well and to minimize the risk of also some of the geopolitical problems and tensions that we see here in the region.
Thanks, Isabel. Imad, what's happening in the US at the moment?
All right. Yeah, 2025 will be an interesting year in procurement and supply chain arenas here in the US and in North America broadly. Companies will be entering the year with the backdrop of the recent presidential elections here in the US and a new administration coming into the White House in January. During the campaign, there's a lot of policy promises, a lot of changes that were suggested, chief among them, tariffs, for example. We obviously don't know exactly what's going to happen, what ends up getting implemented, but companies are currently at their drawing boards trying to game plan, different potential scenarios and how they may impact their business. And if we think about tariffs, understanding what goods from what countries, what amount. So companies will look to be as nimble, as agile as possible when it comes to this topic. I think in general, companies are a bit better equipped and more suited to deal with change, especially if you think about companies having gone through COVID and the disruption there, some changes in the first Trump administration that they imposed around tariffs. So in general, we think companies are a bit better equipped to deal with significant change. But nonetheless, companies are currently ensuring that they have contingencies in place and plans to be nimble and agile as the year goes on and as certain policies get implemented. I think that's a good segue into the next topic around inflation. Inflation will be at the forefront of people's minds. For 2025, we don't anticipate full-scale inflation like the likes we saw, just post-COVID years. What we're anticipating is more inflation across certain spend categories, across certain commodity types, where, for example, you might see some sort of shortages. And in general, we anticipate that suppliers will have a bit more pricing power because of that. So already we're seeing our clients putting a bit more energy into growth and pricing initiatives in parallel with cost initiatives that they're working on, at the moment. So one of the tools that we anticipate companies will try and use to deal with any potential cost increases or inflation is going to be AI. AI is a topic that continues to be looked at, continues to be investigated by companies and our clients. And then already we're seeing it being used to a somewhat extensive degree in certain spend categories. If you think about something like call centers and the automation that happens there. So we think that our clients and companies in general will continue to explore how AI can help them and how AI will evolve in the procurement and supply chain space in general. Another topic we see being pretty prevalent in 2025 is ESG. It's something that companies will continue to look at and invest in, despite maybe the attitudes around ESG from the incoming administration here in the US. We think that companies see it as a competitive tool, particularly in the global market, where you're seeing a lot more countries embracing ESG initiatives, even countries that historically maybe didn't pay that much mind to it in the past. Some evidence of this is Google, Microsoft, for example, recently signing deals to use nuclear energy to power their data centers. So we think ESG will be at the forefront of company strategy in procurement and supply chain, and we think it'll be kind of part of their value prop to their customer base. And then lastly, one of the trends that we expect in 2025 is we expect a bit of a more pro-merger environment. And therefore, procurement needs to ensure that they're agile to adjust to the changes that come from that, and they're resilient as they work through any potential M&A processes that they may find themselves in. So I think in general, the theme for 2025 is one of agility and resilience in the face of potentially big changes to the procurement and supply chain landscape, and ensuring that companies and clients are not exposed to any one critical risk that might impact their business in a significant way. And as always, we look forward to the year ahead, and we look forward to working with our clients and helping them navigate through the year.
Thanks, Imad. Now across to Dan. Dan, tell us about the public sector.
So in 2025, I think the big challenges, the big themes that the public sector is going to need to deal with are speed and delivery. And that's as we have a new government that are approaching their first year in power, emphasis is going to turn from looking backwards and looking at the legacy of the previous government to looking forwards and saying, how do we deliver the policy priorities of the Labour government? So what's that going to mean coming down into the world of commercial and procurement teams? It's going to mean increasing pressure to move at speed. It's going to mean increasing pressure to support programs as they deliver. It's going to mean a great opportunity to move the commercial and procurement profession upstream as we look at how we can influence the delivery of policy priorities. Now, I deliberately didn't start with implementation of the Procurement Act. And that's because I think the policy landscape and the way that priorities are running down from the government will be more important. But combined with the implementation of the new Act, gives probably, without being too melodramatic, gives a once in a generation opportunity, I think, for the commercial and procurement profession to make a real impact and a real difference to the country through the priorities of the government. So moving that down to the level of practicalities, what do you think that's going to mean? It's going to mean more focus on speed. It's going to mean more focus on execution. Compliance is going to, as ever, remain important, and being able to evidence that money has been spent well remain important. But I think the wider definitions of value into social value and beyond social value into economic value of the money spent by government will become more and more important. That being put against a landscape where finances are tight, where controls have been increased, I think will also require some deft political skill, deft stakeholder management from public sector procurement teams to balance off those different sets of priorities.
Thanks, Dan. And Mark, we'd love to get your views on what you think this year holds for the utilities space.
So it's been an interesting and busy year, and that's not going to stop as we go into 2025. The focus in the sector has been around the big programs going on in utilities and the wider infrastructure sector, and the challenge on capacity within the supply chain to deliver those programs. One of the big themes we've been talking about this year and will continue to do is being a client of choice for contractors. We're seeing more suppliers making decisions to no bid during procurements, even neglecting clients in delivery to put a focus where, to be completely honest, they can make more money or make money more easily. As such, our utility clients have been having to consider how they encourage bidders to take part in procurements, and also consider the commitments they make to suppliers and how contracts will be managed going forward. On the contrary to what I've just said, we've also seen huge investment from private equity in the construction contractor market. This means they've all got huge, ambitious growth plans, and some aggressive proposals are coming in during the procurements our utility clients are running. So in this instance, utility companies having to make sure that there's resilience in their supply chain and that suppliers aren't overcommitting on what they can deliver. When we look at the markets for the kits our clients are buying in the sector, again, there's large demand globally for things like transformers, cables, and smart meters. As such, our clients having to know about lead times, plan ahead, and ensure they can deliver to the commitments they've made to the regulator and their customers. There's less they can do to influence in this area other than just plan ahead and make sure they're procuring in good time. Linked to all of the above, another kind of macro theme that we've been talking about this year and we'll move into next year is around resource and talent in procurement and commercial teams. With lots going on, there's lots of demand for procurement, commercial and supply chain resource. As such, companies need to focus on retention so people don't jump ship, but also on how to attract new talent into their functions. We're seeing procurement supply chains still generally aren't very mature in developing capability within their own teams. They rely on standard certifications rather than proactive and tailored talent development. So we think in the future, if functions can focus on these elements, focus on retention, this could be an advantage over their peers in gaining that talent in a busy time. If we zoom into the water sector a bit, I think it's been the most high profile year for a very long time, probably since privatisation. Pollution events are now regularly front page news. The economic model is being challenged. But all the water companies in the UK are heading into the new AMP with huge commitments to deliver investment, which will heavily rely on the supply chain. Achieving value for money in the sector whilst delivering at pace has always been a theme and will continue into AMP8 and beyond. If we look a bit at electricity and gas, the big themes here have been around contribution to net zero targets and the big programs to help deliver these. As well as value for money we see in the water sector, we see a bit more focus on pace and delivery and security of supply in these sectors. And finally, to finish, procurement teams have been preparing for the new Procurement Act. We're seeing differing approaches to this. It's a bit more ad hoc than across the wider public sector due to the relative lower impact of the changes. But we have seen that the changes in procurement legislation have meant our clients are putting more of a focus on supply management as an alternative to going to market, which we think has been a big missed opportunity in the sector for a long time. So as you can see, an interesting year behind us and lots more to come in 2025 and beyond.
Thanks, Mark. And finally, Mert, I'd love to get your perspective on what you think the coming year holds for the private equity market.
As expected, we see more and more activity in the private equity world across both sides of the Atlantic. However, there is still a high level of dry powder waiting to be deployed. Some of the funds already invested in some large assets, and the number of these investments will definitely go up in 2025. And this naturally causes some competition out there between the PE firms, which makes the margin improvement levers even more important for successful returns. As a result of this last couple of years, and now we see more and more PEs developing, strengthening their procurement and supply chain value creation programs, investing into their teams and their partnerships with us as an extended part of their teams. Every fund is obviously different in terms of the way they operate, their culture, and we see many of them really maturing from how early on they bake in procurement and supply chain value creation into their plans, and even more importantly, how they deliver, achieve, realize these results. And on that journey, again and again, we see first, you have to have an active sponsorship, the ambition, the hunger from the CEO, CFO office. Second, make sure the full focus is on hands-on delivery on the ground, which is what we are all about. And third, on that journey, you gotta build a high-performing team, because as we've seen with the inflation, supply chain crisis, this is a continuously evolving world, and you need to have that strong team in place to keep generating value year on year, go beyond even your value creation plan, objectives, targets, ambitions. To sum it up, my call out to many private equity colleagues out there, start thinking about procurement and supply chain early on. There are many exciting opportunities which will help your portfolio companies who are either on a growth journey or an efficiency optimization phase. Doesn't matter. It applies to all the verticals across healthcare, technology, industrials. 2025 will definitely be a very exciting year, and I'm really looking forward to continue working with our partners and keep maximizing value out of procurement and supply chain.
And fantastic. Thank you, all of my Efficio colleagues, for your thoughts and inputs on what the next year holds. Really appreciate it. Obviously, thank you for everyone that's listened to the podcast in the last year. We hope you continue to listen to the podcast with us as we go into 2025. As always, we would love to hear your thoughts on the podcast and indeed other guests that we might get on. If you do have a minute and you did want to give us a slight present for the new year, we would love for you to subscribe to the podcast, or even better, give us a tiny review on one of those platforms if you could spare the time. But thank you very much.